Hi guys, and welcome to another Orc Painter Nerd tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to be painting a Orc Deff Dread in a Sun-bleached blue weathered scheme. It's really important to note that this Orc Deff Dread has been speed painted in about 2 hours, and I actually painted it today first thing in the morning, and I've been really pushed for time today, and I really wanted to get this tutorial done. So if you want to speed paint an army, this is going to be the perfect tutorial for you to watch and pick up a few tips and tricks along the way on how you can actually get decent results but painting in a relatively fast method. I also want to say a huge thank you to Stronghold Games in Hull, my YouTube channel sponsors, who actually sent me the Deff Dread out for this tutorial. Please pop along to their store in Hull if you're ever in Hull or you live in Hull. And as always guys, this is going to be a long video, so go grab yourselves a hot drink or maybe an ice cold beer and we'll get started. Here I'm illustrating that the Deff Dread is in sub-assemblies for making the painting of the miniature much more easy. As you can see, I've left all 4 of the arms off the Deff Dread, as putting them together and gluing them on the Deff Dread and then painting that way would be so much more difficult. We're going to be priming the miniature in Alclad 2's Lacquer Primer Black. It's very important to note that you need to be very well ventilated and wearing a respirator if you're actually going to be spraying Alclad paints. You also have to have a very good quality airbrush with PTFE solvent proof packing seals. If you have a lesser quality airbrush with rubber seals, the Alclad lacquer paints, which is known as a hot liquid, will damage those rubber seals and ruin your airbrush. So please make sure that you're able to use Alclad lacquers in your airbrush before purchasing. Also, if you're not able to use Alclad primers, then please purchase Badger Stynel Res primers, which are much easier to spray as regards to health and safety, and also they're not going to damage airbrushes with rubber seals. Okay, I'm spraying the Alclad primers here at about 20 psi, and I'm working about 3 to 4 inches away, and I'm just getting a nice smooth even coverage on the miniature. I don't keep the airbrush in any one spot at any one length of time, for the simple reason if you don't keep the airbrush moving, you'll oversaturate the model with paint and you can run the risk of getting drips and run marks on your miniature. Okay, now we're going to use Vallejo Game Air Magic Blue. I absolutely love this colour, it's so nice and vibrant. We're going to knock it back later on in the actual tutorial with some very light blue to get a sun-bleached look to the vehicle, or the Deff Dread as it would be. But for now we're just aiming for all the centre of the panels, and we're leaving a tiny little bit of black behind on all of those recesses of the panels, but don't worry if you don't leave too much of the black behind. Just try to be as careful as you possibly can to aim for the centre of the panels with the magic blue. Again, I'm actually spraying the magic blue here at about 20 psi, and I'm just getting again a nice smooth even coverage, keeping the airbrush moving, not concentrating on any one spot for a length of time, as we don't want to build up the paint in any one area too much. exactly the same as we was doing earlier, but this time working on the Deff Dread's arms. Now we're going to use Vallejo Model Air Gull Light Blue. The reason we're using this colour is it's very light in colour, and it's going to really look like worn blue paint that's been bleached by the sun over years and years of being left out in the yard. So be very careful with this airbrush paint, as it's so light in colour. If you actually lay it down too thick, you'll almost end up looking like you've actually got white instead of blue on the miniature. So lay it down ever so thinly, just applying a tiny amount of pressure on the airbrush trigger, pulling it back, and just feather in that Gull Light Blue onto the miniature. Here you can see I'm actually placing it down much heavier on the mask of the Deff Dread, as this is going to be eventually white in colour. But on the actual blue panels, you'll see that I'm only ever so lightly placing it down in the very centre of all of those blue panels that were painted previously in Magic Blue. As I mentioned, guys, I'm really rushed for time, and I didn't actually mask any of these panels, and I've just come straight in with Vallejo Metal Colour Gunmetal Grey, and I'm working very close to the parts, and I'm trying not to get any overspray on the parts. I've been airbrushing now for about 10 years, guys, so I can pretty much avoid overspray on most of the parts. But if you want to get the perfect results, guys, or if you're new to airbrushing, then I highly recommend you mask off those blue panels that we painted a moment ago with either Tamiya masking tape, or if you can't use Tamiya masking tape, you can use some modelling putty. MIG Ammo do modelling putty, and some other companies do modelling putty that you can use to mask off the blue areas of the miniature. Now we're going to come in with Vallejo Model Air White, and we're going to start laying down a nice thin layer of that white on the mask, and we're going to leave some of that gold light blue behind in the edges and in the recesses of the panel. But as you can see, again, working super close to the miniature, pulling back a tiny amount on the trigger to make sure I'm just getting a really fine spray pattern to avoid getting overspray on the blue areas of the miniature. Normally I do what's known as a pin wash or a panel line wash on the miniature that I'm working on, but because I've been pushed for time, I'm actually going to do an all over wash on the miniature that's going to dull down the metallics and make them look grubbier, and also going to add some depth and shading to the blue. I'm using Agrax Earthshade from Games Workshop, but I've thinned it down with Ultimate Models Airbrush Thinner, 25% thinner to 75% Agrax Earthshade. What this will do, it will allow the wash to collect in the recesses, but on the top surface of the panels you'll be left with a lot less staining and watermarks on the actual model. So as a quick method to wash your miniatures, airbrushing Games Workshop washes is absolutely fantastic, but I always advise you to thin them down a little so you don't get as much staining on the surface of your models. Now we're going to use Game Air Silver, and we're going to dry brush it onto all of the metallics and in some selected areas on the blue. So on any sharp area of the blue panels on the Deff Dread, we might add a tiny amount of highlights with the silver colour. But generally we're actually concentrating on all of the metallics, and we're getting a nice highlight from that dry brushing. A thing to note with dry brushing is, guys, don't scrub at the miniature and don't be heavy handed, as it will ruin the effect of the dry brushing. Be very light and just go backwards and forwards as if you're actually tickling at the model as opposed to scrubbing at the model. Now we're going to create some rust effects using AK Interactive's Light Rust Wash, which is an enamel product. This works Differently to acrylics, acrylics when they dry on the miniature, you can't do nothing with them. They're dry, they're there for better or for worse. Enamel products are brilliant in the sense that once they're dried, you can come back in with mineral spirits, turpentine or odorless thinner, which I use from AK Interactive, and we can stump the effect, we can thin the effects, we can remove the effects, all with those thinners, whereas you can't do that with acrylics. And you'll get much more realistic results using the enamel weathering products than you will acrylic weathering products. So I highly recommend MIG Ammo's weathering products, or AK Interactives, or MIG Productions weathering products, as they all work great and give very realistic results. Here you can see that I'm being really quick and I'm just adding areas of rust where I think it would naturally occur, so in the extreme panel lines and that sort of thing. But again, like I say, being very quick. The only areas that I'm really trying to avoid getting rust on is the pistons, because the pistons would be very bright and shiny, which I took very great care in the painting process of the dry brushing to make sure that I really hit those pistons with a light Game Air Silver. And we're going to come in a moment and we're going to add some oil stains to the pistons to make them look real and authentic. So you can add rust anywhere you like, on the blue panels, on the metal panels, but avoid the pistons. They would not be rusty at all. Now we're going to use MIG Productions oil and grease stain mixture, We're going to add it to selective areas of the blue panels, so in very small amounts. We're going to add it to the tops and the bottoms of each of the pistons on all of the arms and any pistons that we see on the actual Deff Dread body itself. If you add too much mixture, come in with some odourless thinner from AK Interactive, or some turpentine you may have, or mineral spirits, and you can actually get some really nice effects. If you've ever seen a bulldozer, you'll notice they look absolutely battered with rust, dirt, mud, all sorts of textures on them. But if you ever look at the pistons, they look sparkling and brand new. So I've took this real world authentic look and we've added it to the miniatures here, and I think it really adds a nice little touch to the miniatures. Now I'm using Vallejo Game Air Charred Brown to create some chips. I'm not using a sponge this time, I'm just creating random scratches on the miniature where I think they would naturally occur or where I think they'd look cool. It's also going to break up some of those really huge open panels on the Orc Deff Dread and just add a little bit more interest to the miniature. Now I'm using Vallejo Game Air White, and I'm coming underneath all of those brown chips that we just painted, and we're just giving them a highlight to make the chips look three-dimensional. It's important to note you can use any white for this job. Could be Games Workshop, could be Vallejo, or any other company's white. I just happen to be using Game Air White. Here I'm painting the base with Vallejo Game Air Charred Brown. After the charred brown had thoroughly dried, I come in with a flat headed brush and I dry brush it with Zandri dust. Games Workshop Zandri dust is being painted onto the tusks of the mask on the Deff Dread. After the tusks on the mask are dried, I come back in with an airbrush colour from Vallejo Game Air Bone White, and I paint the top third of the tusks just to create a really nice transition from the Zandri dust to the bone white colour. Games Workshop stated that contrast paints don't work too well in the airbrush. Well, this is false, as I'll show you now. They work absolutely fantastic. I'm just spraying the Blood Angels red onto the eye lens of the Deff Dread, and we're just going to create a tiny little bit of overspray just to make it look like it's glowing. And here you can see our completed Deff Dread. As I said, I painted this in about 2 hours, but I think it's turned out really well for a speed paint, and it just goes to show you guys, you don't have to spend 30 or 40 hours to get nice looking miniatures on the tabletop, and you can really work towards getting an army completed in a few weeks if you was to paint in this sort of way. It's not perfect. There's a few areas where I might have got a tiny bit of overspray, and a few areas that could have done with a little bit more TLC, but on the whole it's turned out really well. Lastly guys, I want to say a huge thank you once again to Stronghold Games in Hull for sending me the miniature out for this tutorial, so a huge thank to those guys. Don't forget to pop along to their store if you're ever in Hull. You'll have a great day and I'm sure you'll pick up some goodies along the way. Lastly, thank you very much for watching this tutorial guys. I really appreciate you taking the time out of the day to watch it. Hit the like button if you've enjoyed this. Don't forget to subscribe. And even better still, leave a comment in the comments box below. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.